Welcome to the PaleyFest Fall TV Previews. I'm Stephanie Ramos, a national correspondent for ABC News, and I am delighted to be your host for this very special conversation celebrating ABC's compelling new drama, Alaska Daily. And we also want to thank Citi, the festival's official card and official sponsor, for their help making this program possible. Today, we are thrilled to welcome members of the series' gifted cast and creative team. Joining us are Hilary Swank, who plays Eileen Fitzgerald and is an executive producer of the series, Tom McCarthy, creator and executive producer, and Peter Elkoff, executive producer. Welcome, everyone, and welcome to those who are watching. So I have worked at ABC News for almost a decade, but before ABC, I worked in a lot of small markets. So I can relate to a lot of this, and I love watching TV. So it was really exciting to watch the very first episode. But I do have a few questions for you all. I'm going to start with Tom. You're the creator of the show. Alaska Daily is a layered, character-driven drama about a star journalist finding redemption after a career-killing misstep. And that's something that we as journalists think about every once in a while. We have to be so careful, right?
Yeah.
But Tom, you created the show. Tell us more about it and tell us about the characters.
First of all, thanks for being here, Stephanie, and doing this with us. And this idea began a couple of years ago, but it had been on my mind for a long time before that. I've dabbled in journalism before, creatively speaking, never as a journalist myself. But it started playing a journalist on The Wire many years ago, and then through other shows, then ultimately on Spotlight, the film I co-wrote and directed. But I felt like the thing I didn't really get to explore was the personal lives of journalists, get to know who they are. And especially, I would say, in the last 10 years, the sort of rhetoric and vitriol directed specifically at journalists has really been amped up, and I think incredibly unfairly and quite on purpose. You know, why not reduce the power of the press? It makes a lot of things easier, including corruption, small and wide scale. So I thought, man, what's something I can do if I have an opportunity to make a TV show? And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to really get to know who are these journalists, specifically involved in local journalism? So that was always been my North Star. Can I humanize journalists? Can I get a sense of who they are and what makes them tick and why they do the work they do? And that isn't something I really had the opportunity to explore in Spotlight, which was way more procedural. There was very little real estate for personal lives and really getting to understand the sort of ins and outs of the business around the story. So that was my driving force in putting the show together.
There were so many lines that stuck out to me in this first episode. One of them being, we need good reporters in the minor leagues. And that is so true. You need that investigative journalism in the community. You need that. And it's so important and so significant. Now, this next question is for Hilary. As a hard-charging reporter who is resourceful and is pressing the police when they say stuff isn't available, I have heard that many times before. What was your inspiration? Tell us how you prepared to take on this role of reporter.
Well, Tom was my inspiration. You know, Tom, when I met and we were talking about the show, and I'm a big fan of Tom's. I have been since Station Agent, and I heard what he had to say. He's eloquent, he's smart, he's articulate, and obviously talented. And I just feel like, you know, doing something like this with him is going to be a smart show, and it's going to tackle things that are, I don't want to say important, because that's kind of can sound cavalier and just, you know, kind of broad, but he puts a spotlight with his work on things, as he was saying, that I think need that spotlight to start a conversation. And I feel like a lot of the work that I like to come on board is it does shine a spotlight on things and starts conversations while also being entertaining and something you can relate to and something you can learn from. It's all kind of encapsulates everything. And I look back at the trajectory of the choices I've made in my career, and it encapsulates all those things too. So I'm grateful for that opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. And it is so timely, especially during this time where you know, as journalists, you approach certain stories and you have folks that say fake news, and then, what do you do in those moments? Do you have time to explain, like in that first episode where it's kind of explained and you run through why you aren't for fake news? It's so important. Now, this next question is from Citi, our festival sponsor. One of the series' central themes is personal and professional redemption. And this question is for each of you. What do you hope viewers will take away from this important exploration?
One of the things that when I first met with Tom and we were talking about what he wanted to do with this show, one of the things that he impressed upon me, and I was tangentially aware of, but hadn't really fully absorbed it all, was just the fact that so many of these kinds of newspapers that the show is about, small regional newspapers, are disappearing so often. I don't know what the statistic is, but they are literally going out of business at an alarming rate. And these newspapers were the places that members of their community could meet and get the truth, right? And they're kind of gone. People get swept up into these, echo chambers of left and right online and cable news. And so for me, if I could be with these guys, a part of a team that brings that to a broadcast audience and lets people come away with the understanding that something deeply important to our culture, our country, is disappearing, I think that would feel, I would be pretty proud of that. So that's what I hope people come away with.
I'll chime in and just jump on that. Yeah, thanks. Margaret Sullivan, a wonderful journalist at the Washington Post, wrote this great book. It's a small book if anyone wants to get and read it, Ghosting the News, which talks about, local journalism disappearing. I think in it, she said something like 1,800 newspapers locally disappeared from 2004 to 2015. So it's creating these news deserts, right? And it's not just a question of news, but it's also then where are people getting their news? They're going online and they're being literally sort of manipulated to get the news from very specific sources. But even beyond that, and we deal with this in episode 2 in a way that I think is really interesting. It's, when sort of communities lose their local news source, they lose a big piece of their identity, of their self, right? So because those local newspapers reflect that particular community, and our country is so big and so diverse that, like, to lose that, we lose a very big part of who we are, of our, not only ourselves, but our democracy, really. And that's what we're talking about here. How democracy suffers when local news dies, right? That's really what it is. So I feel like that's always been our driving force. But what's been a real wonderful challenge for the room, and we've all been talking about it, people on this call, it's like, how do we keep this really compelling for an audience? Because it's got to be entertaining, right? Because although news is important, everything we're talking about is important, it's also really fascinating. And quite honestly, journalists are some of the most interesting people I know. They're incredibly curious, incredibly passionate. They care a lot about the people and the things they're writing about the places they're from. They're incredibly knowledgeable. And like, I find that really sexy. It's sort of like really cool and sexy and interesting. And I think our reporters and the show reflects that. There's something, that really hasn't been explored in television in this realm in a very long time, in a very deep dive way. So we're feeling like we've got a lot of stories to uncover and to play with. And they're not all criminal or investigative. It's not a cop show. Some of these stories are emotional, some psychological. They have all different flavors. And I think we're already finding our way in the writing in that. And I'm really excited about it.
And Hilary, what about you? What do you hope viewers will take away from this exploration?
Well, I mean, they said it. They kind of said it, and very well. I think it's also a fun exploration of characters. These are people in the end as well, and diving into who they are, what makes them want to be journalists, their background, just what makes them human as well. It's something that everyone can relate to for sure. And that's, I like that Eileen, I call her a truth seeker. I like to get to the truth and seek the truth of the characters. So it's kind of, we have that in common, and something that I hope that people take away. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's so true. You see this in the characters. They're also different. Like the young journalist who doesn't really want to share her story, but knows that it's important and you can team up and you can be resourceful together. Then what really stuck out to me was the moment where the kid runs from beneath the news desk in the newsroom. I've been there. When you are a journalist, you're working on a story and no one can watch your child, you bring them to work and they just hang out in the newsroom. They grow up in the newsroom. So just so many relatable moments there to a journalist's life is so good. Let's talk about Alaska. A lot of interesting angles represented about Alaska. There seemed to be a lot of reasons why it was picked as the backdrop, but tell us a little bit more as to that decision, how that came about. Let's start with you, Tom.
Again, it was really, I had this sort of idea of Eileen Fitzgerald and her journey. I just didn't know where I was going to put the story. And then I read Kyle Hopkins' piece, Lawless, which moved the story to Alaska. But it was one catch. It was during the pandemic. I couldn't travel and I had never been to Alaska. So I did a lot of research, did a lot of Zoom interviews, dug as deep as I could. But, as a reporter, as a journalist, you don't know a place to get boots on the ground, right? And I got off the plane there finally after about 8 months of working on this. I'm like, man, I don't know anything about this place. So it's been a real steep learning curve. I had to kind of do a deep dive, go back again and again and again on all things Alaska, and maybe specifically in terms of our story, the Alaska Native community there, which I really had to educate myself on and spend time talking to people. And I think we're all still doing that, even in the writers' room. We have two wonderful Alaska Native writers who have really been bringing a lot to the table in terms of just catching the room up with things we need to understand historically, culturally, politically, everything. So that's been a really, again, you talk about a show that hopefully will be wildly entertaining, but like, as Hilary pointed out, we have something to say, right? The show is really talking about something. I'm so proud that the show is on ABC, that it's on a network show reaching a broad audience and is really about real issues that I think people will find deeply compelling and interesting. When we started talking about Alaska, we're like, man, there's just so much to investigate there and how little we know about that state. And I think, from early screenings, people have really been responding to that, responding to the storylines, the characters, the type of people who end up moving up there or living up there or living there for generations. It's a very specific and unique place. And we're really excited about sharing that with the lower 48.
To give you an idea, just to jump on what Tom was saying,
Sure.
I'm a man of a certain age. I've lived in America my whole life, know where all the states are. And there were early conversations in the room where I would start sentences like this. That's so interesting that happens in Alaska. In America, and somebody would say, what? And I'd say, oh my God, I mean the lower 48, because it's so exotic and different and strange. Felt like I was talking about a foreign country when in fact I was just talking about a state, which, like Tom, I hadn't been to.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's a very mysterious place. It's a character in the show for sure, and a lot of people haven't been there. It's not a place that you go really and explore. It was on my husband's bucket list to do, and we just did it for his birthday right before filming the show. And we went deep, remote, and it's, I grew up in Washington State, so I thought it would be like Washington on steroids. It would just be like more of what I know, but it's so different, and it's like another planet in a lot of ways, and it's vast, and it's just a perfect backdrop for the story.
And it's giving us so much insight into Alaska. I mean, I've traveled all over the country for different assignments, and nothing has taken me to Alaska. So now it's on my list also, telling my bosses, what story can we do in Alaska? Plenty, apparently. So as you guys move along, I know that in the first episode, the story that's driving that episode is the missing Indigenous women. So as you move along, the stories and the ideas will be centralized to Alaska. How are you? I know you guys are in it, you're living it and breathing it, but just talk a little bit about the process of choosing the stories to highlight within your show.
Tom mentioned Kyle Hopkins, who is a reporter for the Alaska Daily News, and he had this wealth of the sort of closed-ended stories that didn't relate to the missing and murdered, but just the kind of news that is covered in Alaska. And so we had this great trove of, some odd, some, like Tom said, emotional, some, small town stories. And we picked the ones that we felt were the most revealing about Alaska, but also gave us a chance to introduce our characters and their opinions, their takes on the world. That's really been the most, the drive of our choices, is to reveal character and reveal place.
To you, Hilary, once you got to Alaska, you're read in on the show and your character. Was there anything that really stuck out to you that you were like, wow, I had no idea? And it just made you even more grateful to be a part of the show?
Well, I've done, streaming and TV where you get to build and grow and develop. And I would say my passion has always been mostly in film, because you know what you're doing. You have this arc and part of the challenges of, I think, television is that you don't know exactly everything. It's being developed kind of as you go. And that's a great challenge as an actor, a little scary at times. But when you say as we go, I'm just starting episode 3 now. So I still have more to obviously dig into and figure out. And but to me, the most exciting thing is the collaboration, creating something with people and figuring it out together, and is a big passion of mine. And I love it. I love that discovery. And that's something you don't get in film, though you do, but it's quick, it's happens, and you have it's not a finished picture until it's locked, but still it's like, a smaller version of this expansive thing.
Tom, so you talked a little bit about what people can walk away with. Hilary's getting into episode 3, but you obviously have a grander picture of the show. Any lasting words on what exactly people can expect? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but as we end this conversation, what can people expect from the show?
The unexpected, quite frankly, because that's what happens in Alaska a lot. Look, it's a place that people are going to learn a lot about. They're going to learn about the state. They're going to learn a lot about the Alaska Native community. They're going to learn quite a bit and be educated on the MMIW crisis, things that we don't pay enough attention to or barely any attention to in the lower 48, as they refer to us. And like story-wise, it's really great because, Peter's right. In some ways, it does feel so removed. I was up there and I felt like I was among an expat community. I was like, these are Americans. That's how big this country is. It's incredible. So, but the other wonderful thing about it is just like, Anchorage feels like a lot of other American cities in a lot of ways. So we feel like we have this wonderful kind of setting to kind of investigate what's happening in our country writ large, both locally and nationally, and take on issues that are in some cases very intimate, emotional, and in some cases like geographically important, geopolitically important. So we just feel like we have this incredible canvas up there, and we're doing it on a platform in investigative local journalism that hasn't been on TV probably since Lou Grant in a really deep way. So it's been a minute, right? We feel like it's been woefully underexplored. And I think people are going to be really excited to sort of not only see Alaska and all the stories involved, but all the stories these journalists get into. And finally, in many ways, this is a big part of the show is Hilary's character's arc and her journey that this woman goes on from an amazing fall for grace to some sort of redemption, which we'll lay out. But ultimately, it's got this incredible ensemble around her of reporters and people that I think it's just so fun to watch them do their work and learn and make mistakes and have triumphs and move through their lives, both personally and professionally. We think that just, hopefully will make for a deeply entertaining and compelling show.
Thank you for that. You're shining such a wonderful light on journalism and the work that we do. And it's not easy, but it's filled with a lot of good people that are honest, hardworking people that want to get to the truth. So thank you for that. I want to thank all of you for joining me for this conversation. Hilary, Tom, and Peter, thank you so much. And the wishing the best of luck. I will be watching.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's one.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
That's one. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for watching this conversation as well. The special PaleyFest Fall TV Previews conversation celebrating Alaska Daily. And thanks once again to Citi for their support. You can enjoy more of these programs by clicking the subscribe button below. Thanks so much and take care.